You have found why we are Christians. My name is Kent Philpott. This is a conversational interview, and we're talking with Rich Robinson. Now, this is the second program, and there's going to be a third. Welcome again, Rich.
Thank you, Kent.
Here we are. Now, you've described in the last program a little bit about how you became a Christian.
Yes.
Now, I always ask this question. Were you baptized?
Yeah, I was baptized. Jewish people consider baptism sometimes to be a definitive break from being Jewish, goes back into history and forced baptisms and all of that. But that wasn't what this was all about. This was about just publicly proclaiming the fact that you're a believer in obedience to what the Bible says you need to do. And so it was a public statement, hey, I'm following Jesus now. And this actually happened in Syracuse, New York, in a Christian and Missionary Alliance church there in town with a bunch of friends who had also recently come to faith in Jesus. Fact is, you check it out, there's a lot of Jewish background to baptism. It really started with the Jews. We've given the world a lot of good things. Kosher hot dogs, good doctors, baptism. Jews routinely would undergo baptism. If someone converted to Judaism in ancient times and also today, one of the things they would undergo was what is called the mikveh. It's a ritual bath. It's a baptism. And there were sects, different Jewish groups back in the days of Jesus that also practiced this when they admitted people into their group. So the background is Jewish. Forced baptisms that Jewish people remember from the Middle Ages, from Europe, that's just a perversion of what the real thing is all about.
Exactly, the forced baptisms. There's so many things that have happened to Jewish people that could easily be stumbling blocks to the gospel, like the forced baptisms. Yeah, there's a lot of those in history.
There are.
Yeah, it's almost amazing that a Jewish person becomes a believer, in my mind. I have a little, in your statement, under the little item, treatment from or reactions from family and friends, and you talk about a big announcement that you made to your family.
Well, how are you going to let your parents know when you're 19 years old that you have become a believer in Jesus? So one night over dinner at home, I just came out with it, and no preparation ahead of time. So as I recall, my father really didn't say anything. And my mother said something like, well, at least I hope you're not a Catholic. Now I have to explain that. How do Jews think about Christianity? Think of the solar system. It's like Catholicism is the sun. It's sort of the centerpiece of Christianity. You've got the Vatican, you've got the Pope, you've got the cardinals with their red yarmulkes on, only they're not really yarmulkes. You've got all the pomp and circumstance. That's hardcore Christianity. Then the Protestants are more like planets circling the sun. They're kind of out there, but they're not really as embedded, as hardcore as a Catholic Church is. So it's kind of her way of saying, well, if you're going to believe this, I just hope you don't go all the way with it. And that was kind of what I think she was after.
So this is around the dinner table, and this was kind of that.
It was awkward.
It was awkward, but they didn't throw you out of the house.
Oh, of course not. No. In the old days, sometimes if a family was religious, they would consider a child who became a believer to be dead to them. They'd have a funeral. But that almost never happens anymore. Today, the pattern is like shock in the beginning, confusion, where did we go wrong, taking it personally. But, like with my family, things settle down. They come to see, or my parents came to see that I wasn't throwing off anything Jewish. I was still attending Hillel. I was still involved with the Jewish holidays. Being Jewish still meant a lot to me. And, they saw that. They saw that I was hanging out with some good people. They met other believers. And especially after I got to know other Jews who believed, they met those. It became actually good social times. And, in recent years, they would meet my friends and colleagues who were Jewish believers in Jesus. They would attend services at a Messianic congregation that I went to. Not a lot of spiritual interest, but that they really came to accept that, okay, this is a legitimate thing, and there it is.
I recall the story of Peter and John going to the temple in Acts 3. They continued to be observant Jewish people.
Yeah.
And that pattern was followed for a long time by many people. Jesus was an observant Jew.
Of course.
He was there all the time in the temple, at the festivals and feasts and so on. Francis Schaeffer, you mentioned Francis Schaeffer in the material that you sent to us. And I remember Francis Schaeffer. Give us a little bit of story about Francis Schaeffer and what he meant to you.
Well, the reason I mentioned him is that he was very formative. His books, anyway, were very formative in my early years as a believer. Schaeffer was a Presbyterian pastor, but I didn't know that about him at the time. What I knew is that he had moved with his family to Switzerland and
L'Abri.
Set up a community called L'Abri, the shelter. And, his story was that, people traveling through Europe would just come through, young people, hippies, I don't know, shepherds, farmers, engineers, whatever. They would hear about it by word of mouth. They'd come there as a place where they could get their spiritual questions addressed in a very non-threatening type of atmosphere. And Schaeffer ended up writing a whole lot of books. And a number of those...
Name a couple of those books.
The God Who Is There, He is there and He's Not Silent.
Okay, yeah.
Genesis and Space and Time. There were quite a number of books. And what it helped me see is that the gospel gives a coherent foundation for all of life. Doesn't mean you know the answers to everything, doesn't mean you have a corner on the truth, but it gives you this kind of cohesive foundation to build your life on, where suddenly things start to make sense. Why am I here? Makes sense. Why is there evil in the world? Makes sense. How does Jesus fit in? Makes sense. And he sort of built a big picture of what life was all about based on the foundation of the scriptures of the Bible. It made an awful lot of sense to me and helped really to solidify my faith. It really did.
Did you go to L'Abri?
Never went to L'Abri. However, I had a friend there at Syracuse. He was not a student. He was at the time a clinical psychologist. He has since become a pastor in Canada. But he and his wife, he was Jewish, his wife was not, they spent time at L'Abri, as I recall. I don't know if they came to faith there or not, but that was also pretty instrumental in their journey as well. So I sort of had that personal connection there going on.
Are you forming at this time a theological position? There's Christians have all kinds of different theologies they identify with. What were you developing in that point? Well,
at that point in my life, I couldn't have labeled myself, and I still don't like labeling myself. I'm an evangelical Christian by theological convictions. But the Schaeffers, they were from, if people are familiar with the term Reformed Christianity, they're out of that sort of a background. And part of the emphasis there is, number one, that the gospel makes sense of all of life. It's not just a matter of, I'm saved, I'm going to heaven. It affects your whole life all the way around. And the other emphasis that was really helpful is that, from beginning to end, with all the chaos that we see in life, God is still ultimately in control. They had a great illustration of that. I still love it because it's helpful for me. They wrote a book called The Tapestry about their life. And they used the image, like if you go to a museum and you see these tapestries hanging on the wall, beautiful works of art, just wonderful craftsmanship, right? Look at the back of the tapestry. It's chaos. The threads are going everywhere.
Beautiful, yeah.
That's how we look at life, or how we often see life. It's total chaos. John Lennon had a great line in one of his songs. He wasn't a believer, but he had a great line. Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. And that is what it looks like to us a lot of times. Go to the front of the tapestry, and you kind of see things the way God sees them, the way that we'll see it someday. And the chaos makes a pattern, and it's a beautiful pattern. We're not there yet. We're on the back side of the tapestry, but one day we'll be seeing the front side of it. And that image has really, really helped me a lot.
With your theological eclecticness, I think you described yourself as being a theological eclectic.
In some ways.
In many ways, is perfect for the work that you do, because you're not putting people aside because they don't share your exact view.
Of course not. No, I would never do that. The seminary that I attended was very balanced that way. I went to a place called Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. We called it TEDS. It's a lot easier to say TEDS. And it was outside of Chicago, north side, place called Deerfield. And within the broad evangelical tradition, they were open to a variety of views. And I found that very helpful, very liberating. Am I eclectic? Yeah, not in the sense that I'm just picking things here and there, at random.
It's all within the Christian family.
It's all within the Christian family, within the evangelical stream of Christianity. But I've been open to so many streams of Christianity. Part of my work is speaking in different congregations across the board, whatever the denomination or the non-denomination is. In fact, when I was back at Syracuse, a lot of my friends were involved with a Catholic student community called the Newman Center.
Sure.
And my roommate was part of that. There was even a priest on the campus called Father Joe Valke, just Father Joe. I just got to know him as a friend, and every Tuesday night, I think it was, he would offer classes on the New Testament. And I went to hear them, and I learned from him. And to be honest, it was no different than what I would have heard from an evangelical Protestant pastor. See, the other priests thought he was a little too Protestant. He also went around with the 4 spiritual laws.
Did he really?
He did.
Father Joe.
Father Joe. Sadly, he's passed now. But so I learned my basic New Testament from this Catholic priest who was too Protestant for a lot of the other Catholics.
Now this is while you were at TED.
No, that was at Syracuse.
Okay,
Father Joe was at
Syracuse, okay.
Syracuse, but TED's Trinity was a balanced place to learn theology.
Now we got to go on to your next school, Westminster Theological Seminary, and there was a break, I see, between TED and Westminster, and there you did a PhD.
So 1978, graduated Trinity, came on staff with Jews for Jesus, but took a leave of absence in the late 80s to study at Westminster in Philadelphia. So Westminster is much more self-consciously within the Reformed Christian tradition. But what attracted me there for my PhD, number one, it was the only evangelical seminary that offered a PhD at the time. And there was a great professor of the Hebrew language, biblical Hebrew, at Westminster at the time named Bruce Waltke.
Yes, I know the name.
He co-authored, basically he authored with the help of someone else, what he called the Intermediate Hebrew Syntax, this really thick book of biblical Hebrew grammar. And I studied under him at the time when he was putting that book together. So that was my calling card to go to Westminster.
Now, your major focus on the PhD was what?
Well, it was a broad program. It was called Biblical Studies and Hermeneutics, or how you interpret the Bible. So pretty much broad-based. You got a lot of exposure to different fields.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you handled Hebrew.
I did handle the Hebrew.
Yeah.
Many other things. So some 3 years there on campus and some good education. I never liked Philadelphia that much. I couldn't get used to the Philadelphia cheesesteak. I know it's the hallmark food of Philadelphia, but to me it's just like cheap beef with cheese dripping off of it on a big fat roll. I mean, give me a hot dog with mustard and sauerkraut from Nathan's. Why couldn't they do that in Philadelphia?
Now, did you write a dissertation?
Dissertation was on the Sabbath. And so specifically, in Rabbinic Judaism, there are 39 kinds of work that you cannot do on the Sabbath. And those are subdivided into subcategories. So you get this whole taxonomy, this whole chart of what you can do, what you can't do, that sort of thing. So I did the dissertation on how'd they end up with those? How did they come up with these 39 prohibited labors that you can't do on the Sabbath? And I delved into some of the rabbinic understandings that, well, those are the kinds of labors they did when they made the tabernacle, and for various reasons we don't do that on the Sabbath.
Published by a big publisher, sold like crazy, and you made a lot of money.
No, it's sitting on my bookshelf somewhere in a nicely bound blue cover. Yeah.
I'm glad that you did that. There have to be people that study that sort of thing and tell the rest of us.
You would think. I haven't found them yet, but you would think they're out there. I did it because my advisor said, we haven't had a dissertation on the Sabbath in a while. We need one.
Now, I've got a book of yours that we're going to be talking about a little bit later. It's called Christ and the Sabbath.
Yes.
Now, this was published by Moody Press in 2014.
That's right.
Very recent. And did you probably put some of that stuff in here?
I put some of that in there. That was part of a series of books on how Jesus relates to the Jewish holidays. Sabbath isn't normally called a holiday, but it's part of the sacred times of the year. Yeah.
Well, in Leviticus 23, the list of the feasts, it starts with the Sabbath.
It heads the list right there.
It heads the list.
The others are yearly. This is weekly. So.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. The Sabbath. I know the story of the Sabbath. It's wonderful, wonderful. Absolutely. So I want to get to one more thing. We've only got 11 minutes. I'm surprised.
Time's flying.
We can talk and talk, Rich. I want to ask you, what are the three most often heard Jewish objections to Jesus? Now, we wrote these out between program 1 and 2, and we came up with, first, Jesus is not for Jews. How do you counter that?
Big one, and I got into this a little bit in the last program. The reason we say that, several reasons. We are very people-oriented. We're the Jews. Everyone else is not. So there's a big distinction. It's us, and it's them, and them, at worst, are the ones who have persecuted Jews through the centuries, sent the Crusades against us, had the Spanish Inquisition. It all came to a head in the Holocaust. And that's them. And we don't want to be part of them who did something like that. And then also, in addition to that, the whole idea of Christianity is so culturally foreign to Jews. I mean, there is a evangelical subculture in the United States. Not so much anymore, but at least at one point you would go into a church, everyone sits there quietly, waiting for the service to begin. Like, God forbid, they should say hello to somebody next to him. God's going to send a thunderbolt down from heaven. So you go to the synagogue, before it begins, everyone's talking and yelling and kibitzing, and how are you? How's your grandson? How's your son doing? And, they get a little quieter during the service, but then in the church, the high point is the sermon, right? In most churches, anyway. And in the synagogue, the high point isn't the sermon. The high point's when you take the Torah out of the ark and read from it. The sermon, everyone's heard what the rabbis had to say a million times before, so you go outside for a walk or you smoke and you wait till the sermon's over. And because he's not really speaking out of the Bible, he's using that as a springboard for something else he's got to say. So, this is, it's just a different world. And that comes back to the Jewish world and the outside world. So we think horizontally. You can't be Jewish and believe in Jesus. You're going to join the enemy. You're going to join the persecutors. You're going to enjoy these weird people who can't kibitz before the service begins. Who needs it? And, we have to think vertically. It's not about, like I called it in the last show, it's not about switching teams. You know, I didn't get traded from the Jews to the Gentiles. I'm still Jewish, but this is about who Jesus is. Is he the Messiah? If so, go for it. You need to believe in him.
Second, of most often heard Jewish objections to Jesus, God can't be a man.
Yeah, usually it's phrased like a man can't become God, because, you know, Jews in this country, at least they're exposed enough to Christian teachings that are out there. They know Christians believe Jesus was God. They know that Christians believe God is a Trinity, whatever that means. They know that Jesus died for our sins. It's on billboards everywhere, whatever that means. And what I tell people is, first of all, it's not that a man became God. God became a man without, you know, stopping being God. But he took on humanity. And how is that possible? Look, if you believe God created the universe, then this is just another thing that he can do. And so, and then check out what Jesus said about himself. He made claims that he was, you know, God in the flesh. If he's wrong, then he's a nutcase, and nobody should believe in him, and we should get busy telling the Gentiles to stop believing in him, because it's all foolishness, it's all narishkeit. But if Jesus is who he said he was, then embrace it. That's the reality.
And attended to that, and not the third one, but Jesus is the Messiah. How does that message go down when you say that Jesus is the Messiah?
Well, it depends who you're talking to. I mean, most Jews today don't even believe there's really a Messiah coming. But nevertheless, even
do the Orthodox?
The Orthodox definitely believe there's a Messiah coming. But even those who don't still like to raise the objection that Jesus can't be the Messiah that we don't really believe is coming. But he can't be the Messiah because the Messiah is going to bring peace in the world. And look at the world. Where's the peace? Conclusion, Jesus is not the Messiah. So I tell people, I mean, one thing I've said is, you know, God could snap his fingers and bring peace right now, but if we didn't change inside, if we didn't change in our hearts, we'd mess the world up again in a few weeks. The problem's not out there. The problem is with us.
Right.
We are all, what is it? There was an old comic strip, Pogo, back in the 60s, maybe 70s. There's a line from that. We have met the enemy and he is us. You know, we're part of the problem. And if you want peace in the world, it's not going to be forced out there. We've got to let God make peace in our lives. Sounds like a cop-out? No. He turns us into the kind of person who can help bring peace to the rest of the world. But it does start one by one by one. And when I was in Israel, there's a young man there who voiced that very objection to me. And Israel's a tough place, you know, to be. And he, that's what I told him, you know. And so he gave that a little bit of thought. That would be one answer I would give to that.
Thanks, Rich. And actually, you covered the third one, and that is that how could Jesus be the Messiah if we would have peace?
And I'll add another point, if I may. The Jewish tradition says the Messiah is going to bring peace by being a great military leader and destroying the enemies of the Jews. That misses the whole thread of the Hebrew Bible, where not only is he going to do that, but he's going to be humble and be someone who would give his life to atone for our sins and to bring that peace in our hearts.
Yeah, always the trouble, the two threads of prophecy in the Hebrew Bible, the suffering servant of Israel and the triumphant king.
And they both go together.
And they both go together.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of timing.
Matter of timing and how it pans out. That's right.
Right. Now, let me move it just a little bit of a different direction in the 4 minutes we got left here, Rich. How does politics get involved in this? You're a part of Jews for Jesus. But let's go back to when you first became a Christian. Mm-hmm. Were you politically motivated? Had any kind of political position or anything?
Some of my colleagues and friends did. They were very politically active. I wasn't. No.
Me too.
Yeah, no, politics, I was just not I mean, I voted when I was old enough to, but I really was not engaged politically. You know, our family would talk about Richard Nixon sometimes and whether we liked him or not, and that was pretty much the extent of my involvement. I know others who've been deeply involved in politics. Yeah.
Sure. Jewish people are traditionally thought in America to be more liberal.
Jewish people in America are liberal, traditionally have identified more with Democrats and Republicans, but there are Jewish Republicans out there and organizations of Jews on both sides of the fence,
Yeah. Sometimes I have kind of thought that with that understanding that Jewish people had, that might be a barrier to the gospel, that if I follow Jesus, I'll become a Republican or something.
Well, given the history in the United States here, I suppose there will be some people who would think that. But, you know, the reason so many Jews have identified with a particular political stream is that there's a big Jewish tradition of doing social justice. And Jews tend to identify with whoever they think is doing that. So, you know, I think it's important to point out that the gospel changes us so that we can do things to better the lives of those around us, to do deeds of compassion and social justice. I mean, that's bound up. Not talking a particular political party here, just saying do things as believers that better our community. Our New York City branch has done cleanup projects for the community, given out free coffee. Okay, so that's a little less than doing major, humongous social justice projects, but it's all part of the package. You become a believer, do something for the community, and that's how Jews identify.
Okay, good. I love that, because when you look at the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus says, love your enemies. What a radical notion that is. And
it is, yes.
And so we see a lot of social justice embedded in the basics of Jesus' whole teaching ministry.
Absolutely, that's right, Kent.
Yeah, so I like to separate being a follower of Jesus and politics. And here in Marin County, if you're a Christian, obviously you're a Republican. That's not always so. People don't know how I vote. Well, Rich, we've come to the end of this program. Now, what we're going to get ready to do, program number 3. Program number 3. I got 2 books here that Rich wrote. We're going to look at those a little bit. We're going to talk about Jews for Jesus. We're going to get into all of that and talk about what you're presently doing and what you're thinking about doing in the future. Anyway, Rich, we got the end of program number 2. Thank you for watching Why We Are Christians, and be looking for program number 3 with Rich Robinson. So long.